On the Experts Connect podcast, we have thought-provoking conversations with top-performing experts on topics that matter to you. With Experts Connect, you'll uncover fascinating facts and gain the necessary skills you'll need to improve all aspects of your life. Dr. Carolyn Goerner is passionate about creating confident leaders. Now in her 21st year on the faculty of Indiana University Bloomington's Kelley School of Business, she is the LD Inc. Distinguished I-Corps Clinical Professor in the Kelley's Department of Management and Entrepreneurship. Carolyn has coached and mentored thousands of graduate and undergraduate students in a variety of leadership and negotiation courses. Her company, Practical Paradigms, provides in-person and virtual training programs along with individual and group coaching services. Today, Carolyn will be talking to us about the imposter syndrome and how to overcome it. Hi, Carolyn. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How about you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. And can you tell us what exactly is imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome is one of those things that many people have felt, they just never knew what to call it. It's the feeling that you are a fraud, that when you are in a situation, you don't feel that you're qualified to be there. A lot of people describe feeling like they're faking it, like they are, just on the edge of being discovered as somebody who really isn't as competent or qualified as other people think they are. And it's interesting because a lot of people think that they're the only people who feel that way. It's like their little secret. And the reality is that 70% of us have felt this way at some point. And so it's often the fact that people think that they have their own words for it, or they have their own way to describe it. One of my friends calls it her inner mean person who just keeps telling them they can't do things. But even no matter how we describe it, it still comes down to this fundamental belief that I'm only here because people made a mistake, or I was lucky, or I was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
It's not a mental illness. I think that's a really important thing to put out there. It's not connected with anything that might be considered something that we would call mentally unwell. Instead, it's just a recurring feeling. It's a recurring sense that this is happening. Some people only feel it one or two times. Some people feel it every day, multiple times. And so it's a phenomenon that really makes you doubt yourself and your right to be in the room.
Yeah, I'm so happy you clarified that it's not a mental illness. That's
No.
fundamental. Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned that it affects 70% of people, but who exactly does imposter syndrome affect?
The irony is that it's the very people you wouldn't expect. It's high achievers. It's people who are already just pushing their talents and their capabilities into exciting new ways. And yet every time they start to do something new, that feeling of self-doubt still kicks in. It is slightly more common among women than men, but it certainly affects both genders equally in terms of people feeling the same intensity of their emotions.
Yeah.
And the people who are most prone to this are actually folks who are heavy into learning, who are always sort of trying to advance themselves. And that's, I think, the big irony is that most of the people who feel this are people who are working through it, and it's just kind of making their lives a little more difficult than it needs to. There's a lot of different ways that it shows up too. And so people become kind of different types of imposters, for lack of a better way to put it. So for some people, it may be that they're a perfectionist and they just obsess anytime they make a mistake. And it's not the usual, oh, I'd like to be perfect and get better. Instead, for these people, it goes much deeper. And the perfectionist feels like this is the time they're going to be found out. They forgot to put a comma in that email, and that's going to be the thing that makes everybody figure out they're not capable or talented. So that's one we see a lot. There's a perfectionist tendency there. There's also one that kind of fascinates me called the natural genius. By the way, these categories come from Dr. Valerie Young's wonderful book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. And she lays out the typologies really nicely if anyone's interested in taking a look at that. But the natural genius feels like everything should come easily. And if I have a hard time learning something, it's not because that something's hard. Instead, I'm not talented. Everybody else seems to be getting this, but I'm the one who's taking longer, and it just shows that I'm not as talented as everybody else. So there are just a lot of different ways that it can show up, but fundamentally it impacts people who are really go-getters, working very hard, very talented. And it's almost an interesting conundrum, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
that these are the very people who are forward thinking enough to be able to see how things can always get better, but
Yeah.
they don't have patience for that journey. They feel like it all has to be perfect right now.
Yeah. And when you mention natural geniuses, I remember reading somewhere that Albert Einstein was an imposter, or he felt like he was an imposter. So was he really a natural genius or perfectionist? Where would you put him?
That's a really interesting question. From what I know about him, I would say that there's a little bit of the perfectionist in there, but there's also there's a couple of other types that I think he may really be close to, and one is what we call the expert. And the expert is somebody who just keeps researching and keeps looking for answers and keeps trying to get things really, just kind of deeper and deeper knowledge so that they know everything. So
Yeah.
they feel like they truly are experts. And that's the only time that they feel confident in what they're saying. The woman who's the dean of one of the applied science programs at Harvard routinely says that she is uncomfortable when she's presenting a paper. She's the dean of one of the applied science programs at Harvard University. And she still says that every time she steps up to present a paper, she's convinced that she doesn't know enough to be talking. And from the things I've heard and read about Albert Einstein, I get a sense that there's a little bit of that going on there as well. That it's I will never know enough, right? I will never really know enough.
Yeah, but think about it. Having been in academia, it's really difficult. And I struggle because every time I have to present a paper or teach a class or even do my podcast, I'm wondering, am I enough? So I guess I'm also battling imposter syndrome.
Well, Katie, we do it all the time.
Ah,
And that is, it's so amazing to me. I do it too. In academia, it's actually more common than in other places, in other professions. One of the things that winds up happening with this is you feel like you're always going to be found out. And of course, in academia, because we do peer review and we're always looking at everybody's papers, and because of that, you're sure that whoever reads whatever you write or listens to whatever you say is so much smarter than you that you're going to look ignorant. The reality, of course, is you're not by a long shot,
yeah,
but that's the feeling that you have that you're just a step away from being found out.
yes, exactly. And we've been talking, but can you dive a bit more into the struggles that imposters face as entrepreneurs?
Oh, that is, I think, one of the places where we really see things start to become very visible, because for entrepreneurs, they're not just doubting themselves, they're doubting what they create. And so they have a sense of doubt around the business being a good idea. They feel like if they have to go ask for funding, they need an absolutely perfect pitch or request in order to do that. And so they'll put it off and put it off because they're afraid they don't know enough yet. one of the issues with entrepreneurship anyway is that the very act of stepping out and being your own boss takes a lot of bravery. It really does. And it's huge. And so one of the things that happens is that imposter syndrome becomes this extra level of stress. So people are working so hard just to kind of do the basic pieces of it. And so they wind up keeping their businesses smaller than they need to, or not asking for help because they're afraid that if they do, people will figure out all the stuff they don't know, or not telling people even or marketing the business aggressively because they're afraid that people will feel like they shouldn't be running the business or that it's just not good enough to serve their customers' needs. And so all of those doubts, if even when people feel the fear and fight through it, it still adds a level of stress and a level of just real emotional turmoil
Yeah,
none of us need. We're in the throes of starting a new business.
exactly. And I can imagine that it could also happen at home. What happens in the home environment?
I see. I in order to answer that question, let me tell you about my friend Anna, because I think her story actually sums this up really well. Anna had her first child and is a wonderful, wonderful mother. Just let's just put that out there. Okay. She's really a wonderful mother. And when she and I were just having a friend conversation, and she said, Carolyn, I feel like I'm absolutely failing as a mother. And I looked at her and thought, Anna, no, you're not. But what makes you feel that way? And she says, well, when I go online, I see that this person is making clothes for their child, and this person is making their child's baby food organically, and this person is taking their child to classical music lessons at 18 months, and this, and I should be doing that.
Yeah.
And I looked at her and said, Anna, you're telling me that you're taking what 5 different mothers do, putting that all together, and that's your standard for being a good mother? No one person does all that. And it's a sense of, especially when you are nervous about being a new parent or nervous about a new relationship, we often find ourselves just setting standards that are impossibly high and thinking that perhaps the other person will realize or that the child will be damaged when they finally figure out that we never knew what we were doing. So it shows up at home a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine because this a lot of women or mothers feel this way. And then as you mentioned, it's the social pressure just coming from social media that's just, making you feel like, hey, I'm not doing well at this job of being a mom.
Exactly. Exactly. And the thing I think we forget about social media is that people really work hard to put the best possible face out
Exactly.
there.
Yes.
And we're comparing that to we see ourselves do a trip over our feet and spill things and so we're comparing their very carefully curated pictures to our tripping over our feet. Right?
Yeah.
That's just not fair, but it's what
Very
we do.
much unfair, yes. And going back to the work environment, we spoke about entrepreneurs, but what happened to the persons who are at work and feeling like imposters? What happens there?
There are a couple of places where being or feeling like you're an imposter at work can really be an issue. And the first is not pushing yourself forward to take on new roles or not making yourself available for new assignments, just basically playing small, we call it, trying to look for a small career where you can be safe. And that's one thing that'll manifest itself. Ironically, the opposite happens too. We see a lot of people who are afraid to say no to any assignment because they're afraid that if they say no, people will realize that they're not as valuable as they perhaps thought they were. So it can come in terms of affecting how people approach work, either sort of frantically taking on too much or really pushing away new opportunities, both of those extremes can really hurt your career, not to mention your mental health. So we really see that happening on both sides. I think the other place that it becomes really, for me personally, a critical issue is that when someone is in a minority in the workplace, so if they are the only person of color, the only female or male, whatever that might be, they are being scrutinized. I mean, that's the reality. They do stand out and they are being watched more than anybody else because they're different. And people look at things that are different. And the scary thing about that is that the scrutiny itself, just the fact that people are actively and overtly watching you can also make you feel like an imposter.
Yeah.
And the microaggressions can then kick in. Oh, well, so I guess that's the woman's point of view. I've heard more than twice, or whatever that might be. And, and if you have those imposter syndrome tendencies, which I very much do, you find yourself really doubting that your point of view matters.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
I'm curious, does that lead to underperformance from the imposter?
It can go either way. That's a real, and it can either say, I'm going to play small and keep safe and be only talk about things where I'm an expert and not do anything else. Or it can do, well, now I have to prove to you that I'm perfect at everything. So I'll say yes to it all. So it can go either way. But
Yeah.
no matter which way it goes, we're still adding unnecessary stress. We're still bringing about an unnatural way of working that isn't healthy for the person or their company.
Definitely. And the last question, as it relates to the struggles, I can imagine that it affects students in a classroom, but how does it affect them?
Oh my goodness. Yes. In fact, one of the things that really made me realize that I had to deal with my own imposter syndrome was the sheer number of students who would come to me and say, I don't feel like I belong here. I don't feel like I'm smart enough to be here. And that's really scary. The
Yeah.
thing that typically comes up, especially for high achieving kids, is this natural genius idea that if it's hard for me to learn something, it's not because the subject matter is hard, it's because I'm not good enough and I'm not smart enough. So when that plays out, then we have people who are dropping out of school. We have people who are not staying with majors. We have people who don't realize that it's not that they're incapable, but maybe this is a different type of learning than they've ever had to do before, or this is just harder stuff that's going to take more time. But because that natural genius imposter says, well, if you didn't get it the first day, you're never going to get it,
Yeah.
then people will back off. It's also true, that's what we said about the presentations, right? People are always looking at and evaluating what you do. And anytime we start something new, like a new semester, or anytime that we know we're going to be evaluated, like turning in a project,
Yeah.
it's definitely something that can trigger imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I'm so happy you've been sharing and giving us a lot of gold. But I'm going to go a bit more personal with you, Caroline. Have you ever dealt with imposter syndrome?
Every day, every day. Just quick background story. I grew up in a very, very small town in the middle of California that is, very much a farm town. And I didn't grow up with a lot. And so I came from a very economically disadvantaged area. And so when I first got out of out of high school and kind of got out of that area, I was pretty convinced that I didn't know anything, that I was always acting wrong, that I was always doing something wrong, that I wasn't that smart. And that really continued with me for years and years and years. And I finally um, decided I was going to go to graduate school, not because I thought I'd be great in graduate school, but because I had really burned out as a consultant. And a lot of the reason for that burnout was questioning and second guessing everything I did for every client. I spent 10 years as a human resource consultant, and there wasn't a single client that I didn't worry about, lose sleep about, panic that I was telling them the wrong thing. And I wasn't, but I panicked about it all the time. And that stress led to a really heavy burnout for me.
Yeah.
So, went to graduate school, which of course, is just another way to get imposter syndrome. So that didn't really help. But it wasn't until I've been a professor now for 25 years. And it wasn't until about maybe 10 years ago that I realized that I need to get out of my own way. When you are in front of a classroom and you're interacting with students all the time, they look to you as a model for how to behave.
Yeah.
And I realized that I was doing them a disservice if I didn't, if I didn't let myself do everything I knew I could. I didn't try to teach hard stuff. I didn't bring new things into the classroom, right? That was part of it. But I also knew that the more I faked it, the more I just sort of went out there and said, I got this all together. I'm all that in a cookie. I wasn't being authentic. And they kept thinking that, well, they're the only ones who didn't get it.
Yeah.
So about 10 years ago, I realized that I need to walk my walk, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty candid with my students now about what these feelings are and how you just kind of have to feel the fear and do it anyway. So I look in the mirror when I'm brushing my teeth almost every morning and just say, Carolyn, you cannot let this stuff get in your head today because you've got to keep it out of everybody else's heads.
Yeah.
And if it's messing with you, you can't go help anybody. And for me, it's that focus outward, that notion that it's not all about me, but I'm here to help other people was really the turning point.
Great. Thanks for sharing. It's a very beautiful story and
Thank
experience
you.
on your end. And I'm detecting from you that you had to do a lot of introspection and a bit of change of your mindset.
Yes.
Am I correct?
You are very correct. And I looked for a lot of different ways to do that. I read a ton. I talked to a therapist. I talked to and read a lot about women who were really advanced in their careers, but reported they were feeling this anyway. I read everything I could about people who shared these feelings. So, Tom Hanks,
Yeah.
who's an amazing actor, has said that with every role, he thinks this is going to be the one where people figure out he can't act.
Oh no.
Tina Fey doesn't think she's funny,
Yeah.
right? And the more that I realize that is just something that we share, I think if anything, it's really changed my perspective
Yeah.
because now I approach the world thinking if 70% of the people I interact with, and since I'm in academia, probably more, are approaching me looking like they're being maybe aggressive or assertive, how much of that is from fear?
Yeah.
and,
That
and
is,
how
yeah, true.
it is. And so I can't take it personally because fear is a really hard thing to overcome. And it makes people do fear and stress make people do and say some really stupid things.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of made me less sensitive in that regard because I really do give people the benefit of believing that they're doing the best they can.
Yeah. Definitely. And when you said like fear, I can imagine going back to the work environment when you
Mhm.
said, okay, maybe this person is reacting this way towards me because they're fearful, or maybe they're aggressive because they're also battling this. This is an interesting and unique perspective. Thanks for sharing.
Oh, it's really changed the way I look at the world. And I'm not going to say that there aren't still some people who are just mean. There are. There are. Some people are just jerks. Oh well.
Yeah.
But when I think about the fact that that many people have experienced the fear,
Yeah.
chances are good that that's where it's coming from.
Yeah. Okay. And how can people battling these feelings of being an imposter confront the imposter syndrome?
Call it out,
Yeah.
name it. Mine is McFraudy.
That's-
Um, McFraudy, yeah, Fraudy McFrauderson. I call it all kinds of things. But the and what that does is allow you to feel like you own it. And
Yeah.
so it does take a little bit of humor. In fact, when you start really telling people the things that make you scared, it
Mm-hmm.
gets kind of funny if you let it. And the more that you talk about it, the more you humanize it, the more you make it normal, the better it becomes and easier it becomes to handle it.
Yeah.
Finding a supportive community is huge. I think the other thing is really finding people to talk to who are honest about their experiences. Because let's face it, we bond by griping as a society, right? We kind of do. And so one of the things that often happens is when everyone's faced with learning something new. So when the pandemic hit and everyone was faced with learning Zoom,
Yeah.
um, everyone was kind of going one way or the other. It was like, oh yeah, I got this. No worries. And not showing that they had any, like angst about it at all.
Yeah.
Or they would tell stories about, oh, it took me, 17 hours to figure this out and almost exaggerate how hard it was. And both of those are kind of problematic because they don't acknowledge that having to learn something is completely natural
Yeah.
and that having to spend time getting some new patterns under your belt is so normal.
Yeah.
And so just being able to have conversations about learning and being able to appreciate the process and have people that you can celebrate steps forward with is huge. Learning to own your own opinion, and that a lot of self-awareness goes into that. I I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, but it's an oldie, but it's one of my favorites. It's called The Runaway Bride with Richard Gere and Julia Roberts. And
Absolutely.
one of the things about the movie is, as it goes along, is that you realize that Julia Roberts has spent so much time in this movie making everybody else happy
Yeah.
that she doesn't even know how she likes her eggs cooked. And so it's when you finally sit down and say, I like eggs Benedict. That's what I like.
Yeah.
Those kinds of just explorations and really taking the time to figure it out get you more in tune with yourself, and that makes you more comfortable with whatever happens to be going on. You know what you can do as well rather than obsessing about what you can't.
Beautiful. I love it, Carolyn. I really love it. Thank you for
So
sharing.
welcome.
Yes. And what's your message for dealing with feelings of failure on one's journey towards success?
It's a journey. You are not supposed to wake up in the morning and suddenly be everything that you wanted to be. The
Yeah.
whole point is that we get to earn our accomplishments and earn the places that we get by falling along the way. And
Yeah.
so make sure that you're really taking the time to appreciate that you are an amazing human being with the capacity to learn, and you are an amazing human who can make mistakes and still contribute way more to the world than you're giving yourself credit for. So focusing on that. The other thing is to learn how to take a compliment. And so, one of the things I often tell people is to have a friend or two with whom you routinely share compliments and share accomplishments. So, another one of my friends and I, when we get together, the first 5 minutes is always tell me something that you adore about me, and let me tell you something that I've accomplished recently that I'm really proud of.
Yeah.
And it's all done with no jealousy stuff. We love each other. And the more of that we can do, the healthier we get.
Oh, this is so beautiful.
Thank you. I'm so glad.
Yes, so thanks for sharing your knowledge with us on Experts Connect. We're really enlightened today. Thank you so much,
I
Carol.
so appreciate the time with you. I love what you're doing here. And to be a part of this conversation is really an honor. Thank you a lot.
You're welcome and thank you so much. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in on Experts Connect. Please head on over to TeachSomebody.com and give us an applause. You may share your comments and ask your questions in the comment section. Please subscribe to us on YouTube as well as follow us on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. You can also follow me on Instagram at Davis-Owusu. Have a lovely rest of the week. Bye.